Anxiety is interesting. I think it creates a good set of emotions. And you can't have anxiety if you haven't experienced confusion, if you haven't really been thinking or reflecting or traveling to your past through memories, retrieving some of the experiences and hardships you went through. When you're a child, so much of what you do in your tiny little life is just go with the flow. You don't think. And even if you were to put yourself in a space where a good amount of pain was to come to visit you, your brain hasn't fully developed. Your memory is not intact just yet. So you forget very, very quickly. All of us have been punished by our parents when we were younger. And 2 seconds or 2 minutes later, your father, your mom would come to you and say, "Would you like some chicken noodle soup?" And it's as if she had never spanked you, And so you just jump on her lap and you guys have a good time. But as you kind of just journey through life and you accumulate more experiences, and most of them, of course, happen to be negative because that's what the world of emotions are. They're mostly negative. About 85–90% of the emotions that live inside us are negative because just life is tough. And we are limited in information, we are limited in knowledge, we are limited in the way we interpret things. So one of the ways that I think we are able to remove anxiety from our interior is to make sure that you're never out of your comfort zone, because that's what it is. Anxiety has to do with a good amount of unknown that exists in a space. In other words, the future is unknown. The future has a good many question marks in it. And whenever there are lots of questions and you don't really know if you have the answers, and remember, we are creatures after power. If you don't have power in life, you have no choice but to suffer frustration, agitation, anxiety, so on and so forth. Most of them happen to be negative. And the reason why most of our emotions are negative is because we enter into life having so little power. And what little power you and I do have, life eventually puts us in situations where you feel powerless. And then in the presence of feeling weak and feeling powerless, you have to figure out how you want to put this puzzle together. But maybe I can share with you a story. The story comes from the Sufi tradition. There's a king that governs this particular environment, but he's been sad and depressed for many months. People love him. And they go around the world to find a cure for this man, to find a physician who can come to the palace, look at the king, and maybe give him some medicine to make him happy, to bring laughter to him once again. But nothing works. Finally, some of the advisors in the king's palace hear that there is this old dervish, old monk, who lives in the cemetery. And that's what monks used to do for many centuries. They would just live in the cemeteries. Why? رو به گورستان دمی خاموش نشین آن خاموشان سخنگو را ببین. That the wisest people that will be able to teach you lessons, good lessons in life, you will find them in the cemetery. They say nothing, and yet what little they say, it's very loud, that you too will die. They don't need to say it. The tombstones speak loudly. So these advisors eventually go to the cemetery and find this man. And they tell this old dervish the situation about their king. And the dervish looks at these two young folks and says, I know, on the right hand of your king, the right finger, there is a ring that he wears. He's been wearing it since he was 5 years old. Bring that to me. And so they do. And so this old dervish takes a week, tattoos something on the stone of this ring. And when it's done, he calls the advisors, they come pick up the ring and give it back to the king. And they assume that the moment this king puts the ring back on, he's going to burst into laughter. Not so. A couple of things about kings: ego and humility. When you're young, you want to devour the world. The world is, as Shakespeare would say, it's a stage, or as Tony Montana would say in Scarface, you want the entire world. You want to devour the whole thing. As you get a little older, if you've seen the movie Godfather, the final part 3, near the very end of the movie, he's an old man who can no longer walk. He's just sitting, and then he just has a stroke on his chair and dies in a courtyard where there are no trees, wind is blowing, and there is no sign of life anywhere. You're always going to have a huge ego when you're young, and rightly so. You have every right to be egotistical. You're a young man, you have dreams, you have hopes, you have energy, you want to go out there and you want to conquer. You know, you're not living in like some forsaken village in India. You know, you're not living in the 12th century where your parents give you up to a monastery because that's what Abraham did. You sacrificed your son for God. You know, you want to go out there and create meaning and purpose. You have to have ambition. It's beautiful. So the king is old, sitting on his throne and always being sad because he's seen his age or his days go by. He no longer have the energy. His knees hurt, arthritis. And when you sit and when there is nothing out there to distract you, and when you don't want to be distracted, you're pushed into reflection. And whenever you think, whenever you truly, truly think, there is always going to be a distance between you and life. You're always going to be standing on the outside looking at life and judging life. And your judgments, for the most part, are going to be unpleasant and negative. That's what reflection does. It creates a space between you and whatever it is you want to engage in. When I first met my teacher when I was a very, very young man, I thought he was gold. Without him, my life was sad and dark and gloomy. Every time I went to his house, it was like the Garden of Eden. And though his ideas were always sad, but in his presence, sadness, man, it would transform into happiness. That if you love, sadness will be transformed by love into something joyous. You'll make sadness into poetry, into music. Then years passed by and we would still interact. And then I would sit back and hear him talk. Sometimes I would say, what made me so interested in him? He's so all over the place. He's so uninspiring. That's what happens with time and reflection. So this king, who was very much like Gilgamesh, pushing everyone around and exploiting and exploring, came to a point where he says, I've done all these things, but now what? Life doesn't mean anything. So he has the ring and he's not reading what's been scribed on the stone. One morning, as he's just sitting there gloomy, he's about to sneeze, and he puts his hand to his mouth and all of a sudden sees the inscription on the stone which says, this too shall pass. And all of a sudden he bursts into laughter. And the point of the story is this, I think. And you know, in language and stories are always going to be layered, and so you have all sorts of interpretations. Mine would be, no moment ever remains the same. Things are always changing. There is no reason for you to keep an emotion and make it into a frozen sea of ice. Let it flow. You're sad right now, be sad. As long as you know that sadness is not going to be around all the time. This too shall pass. So if there are agitations, if there are frustrations, if there are anxieties, the truth is you're going to have them. And there is nothing wrong with having them. You will be nervous, you'll be shaking, you want to raise your hand and say a question or say something, but you've never done it before, so you're confused, anxious, dreadful, all that stuff. But what you need to keep in the back of your mind is, this too shall pass. You were once a king. You were in a relationship. You would go home, you knew that lunch would be there, dinner would be there, your companion would be there, watching a movie with a companion would be there. Now that companion is there no more. And you're sad, rightly so. But like before, you will find a companion again, only to lose that companion, if not physically, certainly emotionally. If not emotionally, certainly intellectually. And you may come to be 80 or 90, realize that it's time for you to slowly work on saving your own soul, and your wife can't help you. So, negative emotions or positive emotions, this too shall pass.